Story holds 1,000 seeds, a proverbial pomegranate, a jewel of possibilities, a not so silent planet.
Well, let's move that right along to our next performer is a Pat Harrigan out there.
Hello, Philip.
Hey there, Pat. Good to see you. What do you
Right
got for
next
us
to me.
tonight?
I have a short new work of fiction. Can you hear me?
I can hear you just fine.
Good. I have a short new work of fiction. If it seems a little scattered and disorganized, it's because it was written in 30-second chunks between me checking Twitter for news of the recent fascist coup. So, not perhaps the best circumstances under which to debut a new work, but we live in hope. So, I will read it starting now. Good evening. Thank you all for joining me tonight as I present some brief remarks on the life and work of the 20th century science fiction writer Richard Stern. I am here on behalf of the good folks at Black Phantom Books, for whom I am acting as general editor for their new hardback series of Mr. Stern's work, which has been out of print since his death in 1996. This is a rare and wonderful opportunity for me. I was a boy of 12 when I bought my first paperback Stern, his 1975 novel, The Man from Fomalhaut A, at the now regrettably lost Uncle Hugo's science fiction bookstore in Minneapolis. I was attracted, it must be admitted, by the lurid cover, illustrated, I believe, by either Frank Frazetta or Boris Vallejo. Mr. Stern's covers invariably thronged with steroidal hunks and well-proportioned Martian ladies of the Deja Thoris variety. It was more than enough to earn my 75 cents, and the story inside put a spell on me that I have never shaken, and which led me to seek out as much of Stern's work as I could find, not always an easy task. Richard Stern, whose birth name was Dieter Sternlicht, was born in 1938 in Pacific Palisades, California. His father was employed at Caltech, and Stern claims to have been given his first pulp magazine, the 1942 May issue of Astounding Science Fiction, by none other than the famous rocket scientist and overall weirdo Jack Parsons. Stern remained a science fiction fan, but didn't try his hand at writing until he was 19 years old, encouraged by acquaintance Fritz Leiber, who helped him to place his first story in the December 1958 edition of the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction. That same year, Stern married his high school sweetheart, Annie, to whom he had been long devoted. But Annie was a passionate believer in reincarnation and a practicing witch. The term Wiccan was not yet common. Beliefs which Stern did not share, and the marriage came under strain. Some sort of encounter with Annie's friend, the filmmaker Kenneth Anger, seems to have inspired in Stern a radical shift in perspective and lifestyle reevaluation. Very little is known about this, but whatever happened, their childless marriage dissolved in 1965, after which he moved to New York City, where he was briefly roommates with Thomas M. Dish, before he found the apartment in the East Village where he would remain until his death. Throwing himself into the city's gay subculture in the company of Chip Delaney, at this time he also met Andy Warhol, who, enraptured by the pretty Stern, promised that he would make him a star. But Warhol was the last person to be able to do something like that. Andy collected and reflected stars and absorbed them into his own corpus, but he could never make a star. Stern was never painted by Warhol, and his film career was limited to a quick scene of him going down on Candy Darling that was cut from the final version of Chelsea Girls. The disappointment seems to have been profound. Stern complained to Delaney, "I guess I'm just not made of star stuff." Around 1976, he began to associate with the loose-knit group of Satanists, Crowleyites, and other esoterics that hung around the Magical Child bookstore in Chelsea, although he would always claim not to be an occultist himself, and that he observed the scene only to try to decipher what he called its man logic, by which he seems to have meant that he found it of anthropological interest. Nonetheless, it left at least one mark on him. At this time, he began frequently to repeat Aleister Crowley's famous dictum, "Every man and woman is a star." From this point on, that phrase turns up often in his letters and stories, although the reader will search in vain for many other magical signifiers in his work. Stern married again in 1980, and he and his wife Cass adopted a baby Charlie in 1992. He died in 1996 of unknown causes and was interred on a hillside near his parents' graves in Forest Lawn. I visited the site last year in the company of Cass and Charlie and can tell you that its view of the California sunrise is simply lovely. A full bibliography of Stern's work is not yet available and in fact may never be possible. His publishing history is complex. When rights to a novel or story lapsed, Stern would often sell it to a different publisher, usually revised or slightly polished up, or he would sometimes expand existing short stories to turn them into novels. And over the years, all of these works, some published under pseudonyms, moved in and out of print. In the 1970s, his books often included strong pornographic interludes, inserted at the behest of his publishers, which he would remove when selling them later in the mainstream market. In one especially extreme case, his very racy 1977 book, Universal Woman, was published in America to no acclaim whatsoever, but picked up and translated by a French publisher, after which the French version was translated into German by a German publisher, and ultimately translated back into English by Stern himself, and placed with a new American publisher under the title The Galactating Lady, whereupon it became his best-selling book to date. For someone writing at the height of avant-garde SF, Stern was considered rather old-fashioned, even in his day. He wrote space opera, unapologetically but not exactly coherently. There were no efforts at cross-book uniformity, as with Heinlein's Future History series or Ben Bova's Grand Tour books, no recurring characters or elaborate continuity. Indifferent to character work, he was also little interested in technology or the other trappings of hard SF. His light speed drives operate under the flimsiest of technological pretexts, and the tactics featured in his space battles make more sense when viewed as those of the tall ships from the Age of Sail, somehow translated into outer space. His plots are composed of familiar elements: intergalactic wars, space-time traversal, clonings, mental transference, artificial intelligence, betrayals, love triangles, and noble sacrifices. And although the books are not discernibly racist or xenophobic, they also feature no women characters of real note and partake of a mid-20th century mindset that modern readers may find a little alienating. His critics call the books rushed and their endings inconclusive, but I think that overlooks the undeniable narrative power in his best scenes, like the fire in the engine room in King Hydra, or the long cat and mouse sequence in the asteroid belt between the Earthers and the Ixtari in Watch Your Back. But just as any human being viewed in isolation can appear flawed and unfulfilling, Stern's books, perhaps individually unsatisfying, when considered as a whole, like the vast array of humankind itself, take on a more satisfying proportion. Stern's primary fascination was astronomy, and he had such an evangelical gift for explanation that even a reader like me, who couldn't tell you the difference between a Dobsonian reflector and a Dyson sphere, can find himself moved by the passion Stern brings to his prose when describing the spectacles of the universe. In the dark spaces between the stars, where someone like Lovecraft, who died the year Stern was born, saw dread and cosmic terror, Stern saw a realm of infinite hope and possibility. Over and over in his books, men stand on the bridges of starships or space stations and stare out at planets, meteor showers, black holes, aurorae, nebulae, and the like, and wonder. Human endeavor, tiny and fleeting as it is, can only exist in these vast, empty spaces where it can grow and thrive, however evanescently. Perhaps most emblematic of this is the sequence in Parallax Shift, where Colonel Craig pilots his starship into the corona of a red giant so that the ship's murderously defective AI will no longer pose a danger to his escaping crew. As the life support systems fail and the light grows intolerable, the Colonel reflects that just as the particles that form his body had a stellar origin at the moment of the Big Bang, so they will soon return to that discorporeated state, and that maybe at some unimaginable point in the future, they will find themselves, some or all of them, together or apart, forming a new living body somewhere, a new life or consciousness maybe, a new something or someone. Every man and woman is a star, the colonel tells himself, and makes the old superstitious hand gesture that his Wiccan mother had taught him as a child, as the solar radiation reduces him to atoms. Some while ago, in a time of great personal isolation in which I was in sharp need of a project to occupy myself, I was approached by Charlie Stern, who proposed that I edit a new collection of his father's work. Because of my love for it, and also perhaps because Charlie, although an adoptee, is nonetheless the uncanny spitting image of his father, such that I felt that I was talking to the man himself, to whom I could not possibly say no. I gratefully agreed. And so happily, after many delays and setbacks, this year Black Phantom will publish the first 3 volumes of the collected works of Richard Stern, complete with Verorium appendices, with another 3 planned and more to come if they meet with success. I hope they do, as Richard Stern is long overdue for his revival. Thank you again for your attention tonight, friends, and blessed be.
All right, and let's keep it going for Pat Harrigan. All the hat tips for any mention of Heinlein's future history. That I'm doing a couple of those year-long reads with my wife right now. We're doing a year-long Lord of the Rings and a year-long every Sherlock Holmes story. And
Very nice.
If we make it through this unscathed, I'm going to angle for Heinlein, I think.
That's a pretty big body of work there, Philip.
It is a big body of work, but a year's a long time. So we'll see how that plays out. Do you have anything to plug? Any place you want people to seek you out online?
Well, as with most people, I'm doing these online performances as they arise. If people don't know about my book, The Lecture Tour, which is a collection of my spoken word material from the last several years, it's available on Amazon. I know Amazon's evil, but what are you going to do? I usually sell them at shows. And if all goes well, in 2022, I should have the follow-up volume, On Tour Forever, available for purchase. But we're still developing material for the rest of that. That's what I got. Thanks, Philip.
Awesome. Keep it going for Pat Harrigan. And as always, feel free to share those in chat.
He holds 1,000 seeds, a proverbial pomegranate, a jewel of possibilities, a not so silent planet.